Ladies and gentlemen, please let us introduce ourselves as the group number 3, A2NQ. My name is Dongi, and in today's presentation, we will talk about an utterly familiar topic, fairy tales. Once upon a time, this is a common beginning of a fairy tale, no matter what kind of characters it is a story about, like princesses, kings, farmers, etc. These four words serve as an invitation to an adventure in a magical world. But fairy tales are not just simply bedtime stories to children. They lie valuable life lessons in those fictional plots. Originally, fairy tales were not marked out as a separate genre. The definition of a fairy tale was originated from the German term Märchen, which stems from the Old German word Märk, meaning a story or tale. The word Märchen is the diminutive of Mär, hence it means a little story. Together with the phrase once upon a time, it means a fairy tale is a little story from a long, long time ago, when there was still magic on the world. Fairy tales have followed human societies through the ages and still play a significant part in children's lives. These stories have traveled through many eras and countries, therefore each story has many versions made by local people to fit their culture. Fairy tales are basically created as a tool to deliver life lessons to children so that they can feel familiar and easy to digest what they learned. Nevertheless, there are many detrimental opinions toward the impacts of those underlying messages in fairy tales. There is a question to answer. Are fairy tales actually teaching children helpful lessons? With this doubt, our group would like to take the honor to analyze the impacts of fairy tales on children's development in this presentation. The table of contents is as follows. Firstly, we have the introduction, which has been presented by me. Next, about the positive impacts of fairy tales on children's development, there will be three parts presented by Trung An, Xuân Quang, and Minh Nhật. Then, Đăng Quang will present the counter argument about this topic. And finally, a conclusion is indispensable. Now, without further ado, the next presenter will be Trung An.
Very thankful for Ngi's introductions. It's Jongman here, and in this part, we will talk about the beneficial effects that fairy tales makes on children's development. One of which is advocating their mental skills. Firstly, storytelling plays an important role in developing early literacies. It acts as an essential building block to literacies. Children's imagination are further enhanced through listening to fairy tales. You can encourage children to discuss how the fantasy land or amazing worlds from this story can be different or the same from our real world. Through such interaction with your children, it will help them express their idea more easily. Studies also suggest that regular storytelling activities can help broaden a child's vocabulary range. Like Albert Einstein once said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. Secondly, fairy tales help build positive problem-solving skills. When reading or listening to them, children learn from the characters in the stories, and this helps them to connect the situation with their own life scenarios. The story shows how children to have a positive outlook amidst any anxiety, battles, and problems in life. It also teaches them critical thinking skills by providing a multi-perspective view on various types of characters and plots. Finally, children with frequent exposure to fairy tales will have a greater creativity compared to their peers. Being constantly told those stories allows children to get used to the folklore materials, and in turn, they can make their own creations. Some draw pictures, some tell stories, and some even create the bestseller books in the histories. Take Christopher Paloni as an example, the author of the fantasies named Inheritance, who turned millionaire just by the age of 19. He uses the material of fairy tales to create his own magical world and introduces to global audience. Fairy tales were created to aim at youngster development. Therefore, reading and listening to these genres of stories can help kids develop their multi skills. Now, we would like to move on to the next positive effects that fairy tales have on children, which will be presented by Xuân Quang.
Thank you, Jungman. I'm Song Guan, and I'm the presenter of this part. As you may know, fairy tale not only advocate children's skill, but also add in-depth psychological development. First of all, those stories play a role in raising kids' positive personality. Most of heroes or heroines in fairy tale suffer from a miserable childhood, but there are always godmother type character to look after and help guide them to the happy ending. The story of Cinderella is an example of this, and this motive makes children see the troubles in their life in a positive view. Whenever there is a challenge, a solution is available, and the reward is after all. Therefore, instead of quitting, children will try to find a way to go through their sticky patch. This also helps support the development of resilience in them. Secondly, through fairy tale, kids are taught to distinguish what is good and bad. In fairy tale, the conflict between the villains and hero or heroines are made clear so that children can understand in an easy way. Besides character personality, fairy tale authors also use the combination of colors and appearance to describe this conflict. Take Aladdin for an example. While the protagonists dress in bright color and have less angular face, the antagonists are described in black and red and have more angular face. In fairy tale, the villains are often evil and mean, while hero or heroines are innocent and are kind to people. In the end, villains receive their punishment, and hero or heroines live happily ever after beside their beloved one. This concept not only teaches children to distinguish between good and bad, but also serves as an admonition to them about the price they must pay for not behaving well. Last but not least, fairy tale also has cement the parent-child bond. In the book titled Little Prince, Anton de Saint-Exupéry said, "All grown up were once children, but only few of them remember it." Therefore, some parents don't put themselves in their children's position and cannot connect with them. Through the activity of reading stories to kids, parents recall their childhood memories and understand their kids better. In addition, through fairy tale, parents explain the underlying message and then teach their children the life lesson contained in those stories. In this way, children will not feel under pressure and get fed up with those dull philosophy, and consequently, they can easily digest those lessons. For that reason, fairy tales serve as a bridge to pull children and their parents together, And there is still one more positive effect that fairy tales have on children, which will be presented by Minyak.
Thank you, Sun Quang. My name is Manyat, and now we move to the last positive effect that our group want to introduce in today's presentation. In the Italian study, children were offered the opportunity to get in touch safely with danger through the use of tale telling. Fairy tale scripts always include dangerous situations. Through them, children's awareness of the real world can be enhanced without directly struggling from dangers. To prove this statement, we have prepared the example of three fairy tales and how they delivered their warnings to children. The first example is the story of Little Mermaid. In this story, the Little Mermaid, Ariel, accidentally saved the prince and fell in love with him. Owing to having a pair of legs so that she can come ashore to her beloved prince, she signed a contract with Ursula, the octopus witch. Ariel was given a pair of legs in exchange for her voice. However, it seems like she was deceived by Ursula, since, not having the voice, she couldn't tell the prince that she was the girl who saved him. Meanwhile, Ursula used her voice to flirt with the prince. Through this story, children are taught not to trust strangers easily and be aware of those enticements. The next example is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. This story takes the background of a forest, where the wolf representing dangers await and so few people to call for help. The Little Red Riding Hood's mother told her to go straight to Grandma's house and not to talk to strangers. But the innocent Little Red Riding Hood forgot all her mother's warnings and told the wolf the navigation of Grandma's house. After reading this story, children may take a concern that they should not listen to strangers and not share personal information with them. A third example of a fairy tale which children can identify with is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. After reading the story, children seem alarmed by the characters of the stepmother who carries out attacks on Snow White. It is important to note that each child identifies with different characters according to the anxieties that he or she is coping with and his or her defensive strategies. Therefore, each child can take the moral in his or her own way. All of the above are three main commendably positive impacts that fairy tales have on children's development. Notwithstanding those impacts, there are many counter-arguments against them. Please let us yield the right of the presenter to Dan Quang.
Greatly appreciate Jung An, Sung Wang, and Minyak's performance. My name is Dan Wang, and I would like to show you guys a different flow of opinions toward fairy tales. As the previous friends have presented, fairy tales has made such an impact on children. Nevertheless, some people may think of fairy tales as being dangerous for youngsters. They reckon that many young children who grow up in homes where they are read fairy tales often identify the book with characters as role models. This may cause many false expectations and make children grow up in an unrealistic way. They may rely on miracles to happen when facing difficulties or spend their whole life looking for a prince. Some people also argue that the sum contained in fairy tales may cause misunderstandings to children. For example, Cinderella gives youngsters a negative connotation about step-families, the stepmother and sisters who give Cinderella dreadful household tasks and even try to prevent her from receiving the attention from a prince, are portrayed as evil, wicked, and cold-hearted. And yet, another opinion shows that the Protagonists in fairy tales are always good looking, hence they can find love and happiness, while the antagonists don't have attractive appearance, they are evil and miserable. This may accidentally form a link between appearance and characteristics, as well as cause false perspective about appearance to children, although opponents argue that fairy tale may be dangerous in terms of their underlying messages. The overall impact that fairy tales have on children's lives, there is more good than harm.
As a representative of our group, I would like to draw a conclusion for today's presentation. Most of us have grown up reading and listening to fairy tales, which most people consider to be necessary in the upbringing of children. Children who are exposed to fairy tales can benefit greatly from them. Fairy tales play an important role in a child's development, especially in terms of their consciousness and moral development. In children's point of view, fairy tales have made their childhood full of wonders. Fairy tales may bring children to a fantasy land, but as they grow up, the moral truths of these stories remain in their hearts and mind. Please allow us to end our presentation here. Some of the information were taken from these sources. Many thanks to the authors of those articles, and thank you all for watching to the end.